Good morning, Liberty. Welcome to another episode of this program. It is Monday morning, November the 12th, 2018. My name is Michael Boldin. Thank you so much for joining me. 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here on the West Coast, where I am broadcasting live through the 10thAmendmentCenter.com YouTube channel, as we do every single, almost every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Also at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. Hello to everybody who is tuning in, watching EHP training out there in the live chat. And for those of you who are watching us at a later time or in the archives, or even getting this show, which we have been doing now for about a week or so, and then I'm going back and getting some archives in there as well. The show is also being included as a podcast audio-only version through iTunes and Google. We're going to be adding it to other channels in the near future. I really appreciate you joining with me, and I appreciate every single one of you while watching either live or in the archives, smashing that like button. As I say every single time, probably not enough, or maybe too much. You're hearing me blab about this all the time. Smashing that like button that tells the system that you're watching it on that you enjoy it, you find it interesting, and you want other people to see it. And so they're going to show it to more people. So thank you. Smash that like. Leave some comments of your thoughts about what we're talking about today and any ideas of things you might want to cover in the future. I'm going to get to this pretty quickly today. I just got back from a trip to Dallas, Texas, which is why I missed doing the live show on a Friday morning last week. I spoke at an event for the Abbeville Institute on secession and state nullification, and my speech was the general topic was the State of the Nullification Movement report. We do an annual report here at the 10th Amendment Center. Last year's was somewhere around 80 pages. That talks about the foundational principles behind the work that we do, the philosophy, the constitutional structure. And then, of course, we spend that's about half of the document, maybe a little bit less. And then the rest of it is talking about how people are putting that into practice today. So I gave a speech talking about some ways that people are using this today, some individual and a powerful individual example. I guess we're going to get some video on this sometime in the near future. I know they were recording it. And then other examples where states and individuals were taking on the federal government without waiting for the federal government to do the job for them. And the interesting thing was that the event was held on November 10th, which was the 220th anniversary of the Kentucky House passing resolutions secretly drafted by sitting Vice President Thomas Jefferson in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts from the Adams administration. This formalized, not established. The principle was part of the American fiber, part of the resistance to things like the Stamp Act for so many years, but formalized the principles of nullification on paper, passed by the Kentucky House, and then sent off to the Senate, which passed it a few days later. The governor signed it on November 16th. So this was an important day. And we've had a lot of media coverage about nullification the last few days. Everybody, of course, is an expert. And I will tell you, almost every single person commenting on this, whether it's CNN, which I'm going to talk about here in a moment, or every legal expert talking about, they do not know the history of nullification. They are honestly making crap up as they go along, because one only needs to study a little bit of history. I luckily have studied a lot. One needs to study a little bit of history to know that they're pulling things out of their behinds. So let's get right into this. And the big news was uncovered by CNN over the weekend. And CNN put together a report by Andrew Kaczynski talking about the new acting attorney general, Mr. Matthew Whitaker. In fact, they asked about this at the conference, and I didn't know anything about it. People were like, "Oh, wow, what do you know about this?" And actually, not this reporter, but the reporter for Think Progress, which I'm going to talk about shortly, the reporter asked me, "Well, what do you think about this Matthew Whitaker guy? He's on the side of nullification." I don't know. I don't follow Washington, D.C. politicians as a general rule because I like to know what's going on because I want to know what we have to nullify. And if we take the founding generation, the founders' constitution as approved by the people of the several states in the ratifying conventions, we know that a vast majority of what the federal government has done in modern times is outside the scope of the Constitution, and you can pretty much pick and choose just about anything they do, and you should probably work to nullify it. But there's way too much trying to get done at one time. So this guy, Matthew Whitaker, the new acting attorney general, a few years ago, he was running for office in Iowa, and I remember at the time some people were pushing, and they have been still pushing to nullify EPA in Iowa, not getting a lot of traction. So it's possible that during this campaign stop, what happened was they asked this guy about nullification, and I know that a lot of nullification supporters are people who support the 10th Amendment Center because we keep putting out this message. I think they recognize that it's the truth, that if you want to change something, if you want to advance something, and this actually applies to people who believe in liberty and people who hate it, but if you want to advance something, you really are better off. You have a better chance of getting what you want on a state or a local level than you are in Washington, D.C. The people in D.C. are not responsive. I mean, they are responsive for their own power, and sometimes that aligns up, I would say more often that aligns with people who, as a general rule, love more government power. But for specific programs, it is very rare. And I guess I could probably narrow that down to saying when it comes to limiting anything the federal government does, it never happens in Washington, D.C., or almost never does. So on the left, a lot of people for many years have wanted to stop federal prohibition on a plant called marijuana. But it hasn't happened in Washington, D.C., and we think it might in the near future. In fact, the president might be the one to push it through. I think if he is a really smart guy, I actually think he is incredibly talented at marketing and moving a narrative, even though I don't like most of his policies or many of his policies. He's incredibly talented. I think if he's really smart on this, he's going to push to legalize marijuana before his reelection campaign, and that is going to neutralize a lot of his opposition and get him to win if he does that. I think that could put him over the top. But that would only have happened after 33 states have already defied, 33 states and millions of individuals have already defied Washington, D.C. on weed. This is nullification in practice. And Whitaker, years ago, in this speech, late 2013, he says, as a principle, nullification has been turned down by the courts, and our federal government has not recognized it. So, although CNN wants us to believe that there's a nullifier occupying, a dangerous nullifier, occupying the AG's office, and now they're actually longing for the days, and I tweeted about this on my personal Twitter the other day. It's going to be interesting to see how the liberals, the mainstream, not the real left, but the mainstream left, are longing for Jeff Sessions. I mean, who's just a monster. Good riddance to this guy, whether you're on the left or the right. The guy's horrible. And it's not because of Russia. It's because his policies are garbage and anti-constitutional, and anti-liberty, and just about everything good. But they're now saying, oh, wow, this new guy is even worse because he's in support of nullification. But in a way, he really is not, because what he said was, as a principle, it has been turned down by the courts, and our federal government has not recognized it. That's what he said in his speech. Of course, he was running for Senate at the time. And what does a national politician really think of when it comes to the powers of the federal government? That the powers of the federal government are determined by the federal government. And that belies, it is totally opposite of the principle of nullification. Nullification exists whether or not the courts have supported it or not. That is the idea of nullification. You nullify something, it's not because the courts tell you it's okay to nullify it. You're nullifying something not because the federal government recognizes it. You're nullifying something because the courts are against you, the courts failed to support you, and the federal government isn't recognizing your rights. And that's basically much of what the speech that I covered in my speech on Saturday at the Abbeville Institute was about, was this series of events on marijuana where the whole federal apparatus, from Bill Clinton through Barack Obama. We haven't looked at the stats under the Trump administration. We know Sessions wanted to be really aggressive. I have not seen the statistics to see if he actually followed through. I'm assuming he was not able to. But the entire federal apparatus continually ramped up enforcement until they had to back off because they got their butts whipped. And the Supreme Court actually ruled against them in a very famous case called Gonzalez versus Raich, where Scalia, the great conservative, told us that growing 6 plants in your backyard, never crossing state lines with them, and consuming them in your own home, never buying or selling them, counted as interstate commerce that the federal government could prohibit. So even though Whitaker said, and he talked about how, do we have the political courage in the state of Iowa or some other state to nullify Obamacare and pay the consequences? He was talking about as a political question. Do we have the courage to do it? I would like to see this happen, but, well, the feds don't approve of it. As if, now he's actually reinforcing the idea of basically every federal supremacist out there. I like the fact that he actually talked about it. He was asked about it. I think more than what I like about Whitaker on this, because I don't like much of what he said. I like that he asked if people have the courage, because it does take courage. But I don't like the fact that he really kind of just defers. He sets the stage that it's really just up to federal government to tell us, well, you're not nullifying anything at all if the federal government gives you permission to do it. That, mind you, I'm wearing my Jefferson Nullification shirt today. For those of you who are watching, I'll put a link on where you can get that. It's around $25. So if you buy that shirt, it really helps us out. But what's more important, and maybe wearing the shirt helps, is that people in Iowa, it was such a popular thing, and maybe it still is now. It was so popular that they're challenging a candidate. Like, are you on board with this? If there are enough people to be talking about it, then you're going to put someone on record answering a question. And the fact that he did not say, you are a racist pig for thinking of it. Of course, now, Andrew Kaczynski and K-File at CNN Politics tells us, well, he's a racist because, of course, nullification as a serious mainstream legal argument didn't survive the Civil War, said CNN contributor Stephen Vladeck, who is a Texas law professor and a piece of garbage. Stephen goes on, he says, it's irreconcilable not only with the structure of the Constitution, but with its text, especially the text of the Supremacy Clause of Article 6, which not only makes federal law supreme, but expressly binds state courts to apply. There are so many things to correct in this. It is impossible to cover, and I'm going to keep this episode a little bit short today because just afterwards, I'm recording an episode of the Tom Woods Show today, or at least it's a schedule that we're going to be doing this. And we're going to talk specifically about the fact that in this report and in the coverage from Think Progress on our event on Saturday in Dallas, Texas, they focused on the fact that nullification was birthed basically by John C. Calhoun, which is a total lie. Jefferson, 1798, put it in paper. We know that as of November 10th, 1798, just 2 days ago. And I told this story in the speech. Of course, the reporter at Think Progress doesn't include that, really. He just put a short little line about something and then, of course, focused on slavery. So they tell this story that nullification and slavery go hand to hand. And the slavers supported nullification. They lost the Civil War. And so, therefore, nullification is absurd and for bad people and illegal and wrong because losers of war are always wrong philosophically. Joseph Ricciuso, that conference was enlightening. Awesome. You did an excellent job speaking there. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. It's so cool to be able to see people who have been out to events. I know Ward Lawrence was there, who's been commenting on some of our videos. Hi to Matt Hugh, Joseph Standridge as well. Thank you for being with us here in the chat. So they want to tell us that nullification is racist. But the fact of the matter is that if you supported slavery, slavery was seen as constitutional. It was part of the constitutional structure. And there was nothing to nullify. There was nothing to nullify if you wanted to keep slavery. The people who were nullifying were the northern states who were nullifying the Federal Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 by refusing to implement it and frustrating its enforcement. So if you want, there's a really great story. We did a tweet thread on this in response to a CNN legal expert who was trying to tell us that nullification was a legal argument made by Southerners before the Civil War who believed that their states could nullify federal law. That argument was discredited after their defeat in the Civil War and then made again by racists opposing desegregation. They're 100% lying. So we did so far, and I'm going to keep adding tweets to this. We started an entire tweet storm, a thread. And if you don't go to Twitter, that's cool, whatever. But you pull it up in your browser. I'll put the link in the show notes. It should be here on YouTube already, but if you're catching up with us on the blog over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty, where you can find all of our show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty, you'll see as of now there are 13 tweets, an entire thread, citing anti-slavery abolitionists using nullification or pro-slavery people attacking Northern efforts to do this. And one of the main things that we pointed out was when South Carolina seceded, they actually complained in their document called the Declaration of Causes, which was accompanying the Ordinance of Secession. They had their ordinance to secede, and along with that, they included a document that explained their rationale. And the first part of the document went over their views of what they saw the structure of the Constitution, their right to secede if they want, the Constitution as a compact among the several states, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then when they went into the long train of abuses, if we were thinking Declaration of Independence style, what did they start out with? This was their first complaint. Quote, the states of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Iowa have enacted laws which either nullify the acts of Congress, that was the Fugitive Slave Act, or render useless any attempt to execute them. So 100% Renato Mariotti at CNN, or Andrew Kaczynski at CNN, or Stephen Vladeck at Texas University, or the many other experts that we have seen. I mean, there are dozens of them who are telling us that nullification was a tool of slavery, and they 100% ignore the history that says nullification was actually used to fight slavery, fight federal laws that supported slavery. We go through this whole thread. I'm going to talk about it in more detail on Tom Woods' show. I'm not sure when he's going to run that on his podcast, but we should be recording that here in the next 20 minutes or so. I also wanted to cover briefly Jefferson's resolutions of 1798. And we have this article that Mike Meharry, it came from his great book, Our Last Hope. It was excerpted from that. We published it back in 2013 on the 215th anniversary. Saturday was the 220th. And here's a couple of little pieces that Jefferson included in that draft of the resolutions, the structure of how things are supposed to go. And it said specifically, the several states composing the United States of America are not united on the principle of unlimited submission to their general government. So in other words, the states didn't come together just to act as political subdivisions of a giant central authority. They were able to decide the vast majority of how things were supposed to go on a state level, and they delegated few defined. As James Madison put it in Federalist Paper number 45, the powers delegated to the federal government are few and defined. Those left back with the states are reserved to the states are numerous and indefinite. And so in Jefferson's original draft, which this part was picked up later in the 1799 resolutions, the follow-up resolutions that many people have pretended don't exist, they claim that nullification, the word itself, was taken out. But first, before that, so Jefferson said, whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. No, this idea did not come from John C. Calhoun. I'm going to do a show eventually on this, on how, my views on what Calhoun did versus what Madison had to say about it. I don't think Calhoun actually came up with a good structure on how to implement, even though many of his principled views may have been interesting. Now, Jefferson said, well, what do you do about it? He said nullification is the rightful remedy. And who used nullification in the early days of the American Republic? People who opposed military conscription, people who opposed violation of free speech, people who opposed, limitations on illegal immigrants as one. I mean, that's how it would have been defined today. So aliens, they wanted to kick aliens out, and they weren't into it. So the lefties look pretty disingenuous, and I think that's how Matt Hugh put it. These people are so disingenuous. They're straight up lying. But it isn't just the left. Mark Levin has famously sounded like Rachel Maddow. We even put out a meme a few years ago that he sounds like Rachel Maddow every time he attacks us on nullification. We continually embarrass him on this until he shuts his mouth, which is sometimes not easy to do. Now, he may be good on other things. I don't listen to him because he has been such a horrible person to us. But that's another story. So this idea did not come from the slave owners. Slave owners wanted to use it to stop a tariff. So the South Carolina nullification crisis wasn't even about slavery. In the late 1820s, early 1830s, 2 decades before the bigger nullification crisis, which was the northern states nullifying over the Federal Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. So the nullification crisis that was pushed by John C. Calhoun and the southern states was over taxes, over tariffs. So if some of the people on the left think of Trump as an idiot, and I know many libertarians do too, but if they want to attack him over his tariff program, why don't they just bring up this? I mean, they're just very disingenuous. They like to just attack, they slander, etc. And the last thing I want to say, and I know I'm just kind of blasting through this quickly, but I do want to make sure I have time to kind of look at some of my notes before I talk with Tom Woods today, was this report in quotes, by Think Progress. And I have dealt with these clowns for years. To call them clowns is an understatement. They are not stupid. They are incredibly intelligent. They know exactly what they are doing. They are 100% manipulative. They are sneaky stalkers. And every single time I deal with a Think Progress reporter in person, this is, mind you, at least the Think Progress reporter talked to me. CNN cited the 10th Amendment Center in this report. They talked about the movement and the 10th Amendment Center being at the forefront of it in modern times. But of course, they didn't call us. So we tweeted at the reporter last night, and I gave them our phone number, just in case they just couldn't find it, even though it's on our website. So shady reporters will not contact you. Even the New York Times, when they oppose the work that we do, they always call us. They always quote. In fact, sometimes some of the biggest publications will even send me a quote that they're going to put in an article and say, hey, Michael, did we cover this properly? I've seen fair coverage in Reuters, AP, CBS, New York Times, LA Times, even if they're not on our side. They at least talk to us. CNN didn't call. Rachel Maddow has never called. Think Progress at least calls. But what they do is they've done this year in and year out, and I've dealt with this off and on a few times over the last decade or so. What they'll do is they send a reporter to a conference, and then the reporter comes up to you right after your speech, and they're all excited. They're like, hey, man, that was really interesting. Thanks so much. I'm a reporter. Hey, what do you think about such and such? And it's been a while because I haven't been going to as many events in the last few years, so I wasn't as sharp this time. So I answered his question pretty quickly, pretty innocuous, something about Whitaker. I'm like, I don't know anything about this guy. The guy before him was garbage, so I can't imagine what it's going to be. Giuliani next, also garbage. Chris Christie, these people are terrible. So I'm like, oh, wait a second. Who do you say you report for? And the guy says, oh, I've written for a bunch of places. Oh, really? Well, who? And then he listed something like Slate, maybe MSN. Oh, I've written for blank, 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 blank. Okay, well, who are you writing for now? Because every reporter, when they're at least being honest, even if they have a slant to their view, if they're being professional, they generally hand you a card and they say, hey, my name is so-and-so. I'm with the New York Times. I'm with U.S. News. I want to ask you a question. Do you have a moment? This guy just, pretends to be your buddy. They try to get you to saying something weird. They wanted me to say something positive about this new AG appointee, which I hadn't even researched, and the only reports are slams against him. So, and then finally he says, oh, well, I write for Think Progress. So my first response was, oh, man, what happened to you guys on war? You used to be good. So because on the left, they switch back and forth so much, and on the right, they do this too on principles. So, of course, the guy does not quote almost anything I talked about. I even cited Hillary Clinton's tweet to support states' rights. Recent tweet, late October as a defense of civil liberties against the so-called right-wing Supreme Court. But that's a tool of slander. They're sneaky, and they have an agenda, and it doesn't matter what you say to them. And that's why I never will talk to the Southern Poverty Law Center, because it doesn't matter what you say to them. They will not include anything. All the talk that I gave about marijuana, opposition to war, opposition to mass surveillance, asset forfeiture, not a word about that made it into this so-called report at Think Progress. But of course, they included a bunch of stuff about racism, slavery, and that guy in Alabama in Modern Times who really wanted to keep black kids out of school. And that's it. Boom, done. And then they put a really bad picture of me too. Well, no, it's a fun one. That's me talking about remember the 10th of November. So anyways, I hope you found this interesting. I'm cutting it short today. These are all quotes of the day. I will make sure links are up there. Should already be there on YouTube. I will post this to all the other channels, whether it's BitChute, Brighteon, Keyport, iTunes, Google Podcasts, and of course our website, Facebook, Twitter. Keep an eye out for that. And please like, comment, and share. It really helps us spread the word. And I'll be back on, as we are, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'll see you on Wednesday morning, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. I hope you found this interesting. I hope you found it enlightening, fun. Man, it's infuriating, too. And I appreciate all of you who've been here in the live chat and everybody who's watching us later on. Thank you for watching and listening, and have a great day today.